The concept of the newest album from veteran art rap / indie rap artist Open Mike Eagle, produced by Kenny Segal, is the following. Every song focuses on the same relationship between the same two people, ending in every possible universe. Every single song features some stage of the breakup in a different universe. Each song is a window into the collapse that's a little different, but a little the same. It's not Open Mike Eagle's first breakup album. The one that looms the largest over this project is 2020's seminal and heart-wrenching anime Trauma and Divorce, nor would I call this my favorite album of his. I go back and forth between the aforementioned anime Trauma and Divorce, dark comedy, Brick Body Kids Still Daydream, or the collab with producer Paul White, Hella Personal Film Festival, the last of which in my opinion is hella underrated. But in a pretty tough year for hip-hop in 2026, especially in comparison with last year, a new Open Mike Eagle album is incredibly welcome. If you're looking to bail before this conversation gets uncomfortable and weird, go hear it. It's awesome. It's excellent. Will absolutely be among the best albums of this year. Seriously, go check it out. Are you gone? Seriously, y'all can just leave at this point. It'll get twisted where we might go next. This is going to be another exercise in me making something stuffed full with in-jokes and references I don't expect anyone to get. You know, like the Open Mike Eagle review from last year of Neighborhood Gods Unlimited, one of the best albums of 2025. Maybe even more impenetrable. I'm giving myself a lot of license to do more of that this year, but it's not for everyone. You can leave at any time. You don't even have to technically need me to tell you that. You can close the browser window or tap to another video. I might be a little bit annoyed if you do, but I can get over it, get over myself. Go ahead, go on, click that video. Or, click the like button and subscribe while you're here if you want to see more. Okay. Are they gone now? Well, for those who can stick around this long, let's clean out a few more. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. This new Open Mike Eagle and Kenny Segal album, Doomed, and why I don't tend to like multiverses, and the poetry of endings.
Particle man, doing the things a particle can. What's he like? It's not important. Particle man, is he a dot? Or is he a speck? When he's underwater, does he get wet? Or does the water get him instead?
There are two ways I can approach a multiverse conversation. The first being from a very academic background where I've got a degree in physics and I am well familiar with the tangled conversation around alternate universes and probability and the misunderstanding of Schrodinger and superposition. Thank you so very much, The Big Bang Theory, which states that linear combinations of solutions to Schrodinger's equation all still equal the solution of Schrodinger's equation. Or a better way of describing this is that the combination of all eigenfunctions of the Schrodinger equation describes the state of the system. I mean, Open Mike Eagle named one of his songs after Schrodinger, and he seems to mostly get it. All this will be relevant later. Maybe. So, we necessarily have to get into some probability amplitudes and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and a whole lot of linear algebra if we want to do this properly. But to vastly simplify this, so I don't have to go get out a whiteboard, anyone who's taken enough quantum physics and university courses, please don't get in the comments and get mad at me about this. I apologize profusely in advance. At the smallest possible state of atoms, the subatomic level, the energy state of the system has a discrete set of probabilities. We can't fully know the exact state of the system because when you introduce light and energy into the system at the subatomic level through taking a measurement, you change the system. You've added energy. This is where the whole Schrodinger's cat thought experiment comes into play. You might have heard about this with the cat in the sealed box with the vial of poison, where until you open the damn box, you won't know whether the cat is alive or dead. And until then, the probability distribution and the bad joke that results suggests that you got a 50% dead cat. But that is a macro thought experiment. It's the way a lot of people can conceptualize the problem. A lot of this is only intended to be applied at the subatomic level. And since Heisenberg's uncertainty principle shows that you can't know the exact change in position or change in momentum beyond a specific h-bar over 2 constant, you can't know something's exact position or exact momentum at the subatomic level at the same time. This is why quantum is way more about probability and statistics than it is exact measurements. It's why Dirac notation and linear algebra is used to represent those functions in a clearer way, make some of the equations a little bit, well, marginally easier to solve. Okay, I've lost more of you. Let's try to keep going. I'm hoping this quick refresh through, well, my textbooks from 15 years ago, it's enough. Let's try to simplify this even more and get to the whole multiverse thing. When Paul Dirac of the algebraic notation mentioned previously and Erwin Schrodinger shared their Nobel Prize in 1933, they described how through an instant of measurement, you could observe a superposition of probabilities. A superposition you can imagine like when 2 sound waves interfere with each other and they get a lot louder at a specific frequency. The amplitude goes up, the volume goes up, except with probable subatomic states. This means that there is a higher likelihood in the superposition energy state that you could know either the change in position or the change in momentum of a specific atomic system, but it kind of evens out. You can know more of one and less of the other. But once you introduce the possibility of time, the moment of actually taking the measurement and introducing light and energy to do so, where now things have occurred on a timeline, there are multiple probabilities that could have led to this moment, or who could have come after. The act of introducing measurement and energy into the system led to the superposition. You've got some discrete knowledge, but where things were in the past or will be in the future, you can't fully know. You've got probabilities that could add up to that point. The point here in all this larger theoretical physics conversation, you're gonna get a lot of probable extrapolations about what's in alternative past or futures, and it's a better thought experiment than anything that has empirical data or hard evidence. AKA, if you were having a conversation with anyone outside of an advanced physicist who is likely more obnoxious than any stereotype on the Big Bang Theory, trust me, I was there, I know. If they're saying that there is evidence of a multiverse, it's bullshit. Just plain and simple, it's bullshit. I bring all this up because, well, it's one of the few times I actually get to use a niche study of my university degree in 15 fucking years. But when you consider how the public understands the multiverse or alternative universes, understand that they're not working off of, well, a bunch of advanced physics, but a pseudo-scientific understanding at best. Because Marvel and DC wanted to tell alternate history stories with their characters, and just so happened to incorporate the universes and characters of companies that they bought into their mainline stories throughout the Silver and Bronze Age, so why that couldn't they come from like an Earth 2 or Earth 3? The technobabble will pay some lip service to physics, but tends to get a lot of the details wrong because most comic book writers and audiences don't care or have to care. It is fiction, and that's normally fine by me. Up until the stories start becoming more about universe mechanics and getting very meta about the comics book industry, then, well, anything else. Insert Dark Knight's metal discourse here. And the long-running bet that Marvel, and I mean the MCU, made in the late 2010s and early 2020s is that they could translate the multiverse concept to a much larger mainstream public who had seen enough sci-fi and fantasy over the decades to mostly get on board. There was enough cultural familiarity. Alternative universes of heroes and villains with different histories or events that made different versions of the characters what they are, and that's a license to print money and merchandising sales, you know, the real reason why megacorps do this, and then ramp up the stakes even further post-Thanos, with their proof of concepts being the alternate timeline and universes they played with in Avengers Endgame, or Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where they did a lot more setup, and I already explored some of that in my review 4 years ago, and especially with Loki or the Spider-Verse films. You could tell all the proof of concepts, and given how much money they printed, it's not really surprising. And yet, truthfully, I don't think it all fully worked outside of some isolated stories. Diagnosing everything that may have gone wrong post-Endgame with the MCU has been a bit of a cottage industry online, especially on this platform, and it's kind of stuffed with grifters in between the tangled web of spin-offs, TV series, the retirement of established characters, the deaths of certain actors, all things Jonathan Majors, or the goddamn pandemic of it all. And even then, my hot take here is that the bad period of the MCU was nowhere near as bad as some have made it out to be, like all those grifters. But my pet theory is that while audiences might grasp the basics of the alternate universe or the multiverse and will pop for every bit of nostalgic fan service coming out of the comics or the TV shows, the deeper you get into the multiverse lore, the mechanics of how it all tangles together, how it works, the more lost or disconnected they will be. I give audiences probably more credit than they deserve, but if you lost the plot with my whole quantum physics lecture at the very start of this, it's not that far removed from the technobabble and how multiverse mechanics get discussed, especially when it gets nerdier. And Marvel's choice to double down on multiverse interconnectivity, at least for a time, and a lot of niche references at the expense of telling good stories grounded in character, has left audiences gravitating most towards, well, the characters they already knew and mostly trusted. It's why Spider-Man movies continue to overperform independent of any multiverse connection. And it's also why Everything Everywhere All at Once kind of worked, because it was grounded fundamentally in character, won Oscars for it. And even then, that movie's reception has aged interestingly since 2022. The backlash should really come for it. Because my larger issue with multiverse storytelling is more conceptual. To me, the infinite multiverse can be a tension-destroying element, especially if there are ways for people to jump between universes, or know about other universes or transmit knowledge therein. And even if you've got a finite number of universes, take a look at maybe DC, you've got the power to leap between them. If you have that, it's an insurance policy and escape that so many don't. Because if you can leap across other infinite timelines at will, have that sort of power, how do you conceptualize stakes or risk? If you know DC, look at what happened at the end of Countdown. How do you handle the yawning existential emptiness of the feeling that necessarily there is something so infinitesimally close to you that you could be replaced from that timeline and nobody would ever really know? How do you accommodate for the paralysis of choice amidst infinite options? How is your creativity bounded in a way to provide stakes that feel tangible? And if you double down at the whole shut off your brain and enjoy the thrill ride, or don't think about all that existential emptiness, when does the nihilism just leave you a bit of a burned out shell? Insert my massive tangent here about Deadpool and Wolverine or certain seasons of Rick and Morty, and if I'm looking to kick a very specific hornet's nest, Doctor Who. And thus, if I wanted to be insufferably pedantic as all hell, and maybe even a little silly, I'd start drilling into the logical quirks and fallacies of making Doomed like this. Because on some level, it seems like Open Mike Eagle grasped the science a little bit better than your average comic book writer. He was an educator. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually did some of the homework, and probably was better understanding or explaining any topics than I did earlier in this video. But for one, if in every universe that these people form a relationship, is that a foundational point of this system, such that the breakup is the note of information when we as an audience interact with it? He's described in interviews the paradigm shift that with anime trauma and divorce had him breaking his married cultural signifier at large in hip-hop, where I didn't even know he was in a relationship afterwards. He keeps things private that might have influenced this album. We're only receiving information now based upon its ending. We're now considering multiple binding events in this infinite continuum in timeline, where in each space there are probable histories that are unbounded due to our lack of information or art around them? Or is the creation of the art itself the instigating note of information within the system and it's no longer closed? If it is at least partially autobiographical, does Open Mike Eagle imply that we all live in the shared multiverse with the overlapping data point being this breakup, or the knowledge thereof that it's happening? Is this a finite multiverse or an infinite one? Can people travel between them? Do they know about the multiverse existing? Can information be shared across them? If we're considering an infinite spread of probability possibilities. Is this bounded album track list only a sample of the breakup existing infinitely, like how Neighborhood Gods Unlimited was one single limited broadcast in the larger continuity of dark comedy television? Or are these just the universes in which the relationship happened, in which they ended? And if so, what weight would they actually have amidst the other infinite possibilities? Where's the emotional stakes if we can just hop to another universe? And if you've all been paying close attention, or have been following me down this rabbit hole, you probably will have noticed I've been making a rather stupid mistake. On purpose, I might add. Probably been making several, but if you've indulged me thus far, let's pull back the curtain. Because I've been really insufferably nerdy in how I've discussed the mechanics here. From physics to storytelling to meta commentary, and me myself getting meta about the experience of interacting with the meta commentary of an art piece. The attempt to be driven off of logic and analysis and all those other words prized by those rich in rationality and nothing else. Followed in the footsteps of the literal genius of Paul Dirac, a man who was instructed at an early age to never start a sentence without knowing its end. And he famously did not like poetry. In discussing Oppenheimer, and especially Oppenheimer using poetry to describe physics context, to quote, "The aim of science is to make difficult things understandable in a simpler way. The aim of poetry is to state simple things in an incomprehensible way. The two are incompatible." Now, anyone who knows or studies poetry would find that statement both underinformed and ridiculous, more revealing of the person who made it than of any insight on art or poetry if they just consider it meaningless fluff around delivering the information or the story. But the spore behind it has long tendrils across both critique and the technology that we use to disseminate critique. In the former group is the obsession with plot holes or lore, the mechanism that delivers the story rather than the emotional beats that will sell it and be remembered. The refusal to engage with ambiguity in tone and performance beyond the script. A deference to objective standards in which anything can be simplified and quantified. If you can tell I got some very obvious animosity towards this crowd, I'll have you know I used to be an online Star Wars fan. If you know, you know. But in the latter, it's also the attempt to reduce the human to terms, metadata to be search engine optimized, streamlined and explained for the easiest consumption and click-through. And in the grandest, grossest irony of them all, it's why the large language models deemed artificial intelligence, where the selection of the correct data in their databases is probabilistically driven, it can only describe the overarching concept of doomed and get no further. In the query of information, generative AI is a poorly calibrated machine that can barely identify the difference between a description and an incorrect edge case to create the superposition, leaving the unquantifiable to exist beyond its reach. Or, to simplify this even more broadly, if you think I've spent more time commenting on structural critique rather than the emotional experiences of this art, winding into models and probabilities and architecture rather than feeling, you're correct. If you're nerdy enough, it's easier than actually telling the story, engaging with the emotional reality. We can say it's necessary to get into the weeds of artistic analysis, but is all this just deflection? Intellectualization from getting to know what we truly feel? The shield we've been building to protect ourselves from the doom at hand? I don't know, could that be relevant to this project? Oh yeah, we're not done swerving yet, because the overlap of people who recognize the comparison I'm about to make before this video is slim indeed. It might also be where some of you diehards jump out next. Sorry to see some of y'all leave, I'm not surprised. Mike, I recognize probably not your thing either. I do hope you stick around though. Now, for those of you who do not know or recognize this, in 2009, the independent country band American Aquarium released the now classic album Dances for the Lonely, where every single song song is a slightly different view of the frontman BJ Barham's breakup. If you want to go take a break to listen to the album, go ahead. I highly advise you do so. It is on streaming, but go buy it on Bandcamp. I would give it a perfect 10 out of 10, and I do not give out those scores lightly. It's amazing. Please go check it out. Okay, you finished? Or you click back now? Yeah, the album rules. Glad to introduce it. But if you were listening to the lyrics, you might have made a couple observations. The first being a cross-genre parallel between this and Doomed, where if there was a multiverse for Dances for the Lonely, it's comprised of blurry, alcohol-soaked rooms and overthought, rambling frustrations. In other words, if I go off of some of the songs here, it's not that far removed at all, but I've been saying country and hip-hop have way more in common than some will think, including how we talk and then complain about the issues within those genres. But every single song on Dance for the Lonely feels like hitting a different angle of the same moment of collapse, where every wall falls in, and it sure as hell ain't pretty. Especially when you consider our frontmen. Because there's a tricky thing when it comes to breakup albums, especially if the grounding in both texture and emotion is to feel more realistic. Your performer, your protagonist, may not be entirely sympathetic, if not in their emotions, which are healthy to feel, then in the expressions of those emotions, which can be considerably a lot less healthy. And speaking as someone who went through a solid 7 or so breakups since I started reviewing Open Mike Eagle in 2014, that is painfully realistic. Sometimes it feels a little benign and mutual, the sadness of knowing the relationship has run its course, but where the emotions are a bit distant. Pain with the delayed fuse. Sometimes it's going to be heart-wrenching. Getting dumped for reasons you might not know nor fully understand, or worse yet, when you do understand and realize they probably had some sort of point. And sometimes you have to be the one to initiate the breakup with the knowledge that you are going to hurt the other person. And you have to hope that it'll be better overall in the end for both parties. And that's just the action of the breakup itself, not counting the messy and distinctly flawed emotional dynamic on both sides that will lead to the collapse or will come after, where one knows what's coming and the other may or may not, and then comes after all of that. There are relationships that end with one side as an absolute monster, where the partner has to get the fuck away. But as you get older, the relationships run a little longer, there can be shades of gray. Little miscommunications and slip-ups. The things that you remember distinctly as instigating factors that you bury deep down, even if they annoyed you at the time, and then the bigger causes that you remember days, months, even years later. And that's providing there is a level of introspection at all, that the person dumping or being dumped even fully grasp what it is about the partner or themselves that has led to all of this. This is where I'll also argue that musical albums fill a rather unique space in exploring the emotion and the experience of going through a breakup. There are more movies about the commencement of relationships than their endings, and even fewer that I would argue handle them all that well. And when was the last time like a video game adequately showed the emotional dynamics of a breakup that felt realistic? I played It Takes Two with my fiance and then wife, and then by the end of that game, I think we both agreed a more bold story choice would have had the couple actually break up at the end, that a reconciliation felt rather abortive. I'm not sure we bought it. The closest you would probably see to exploring these dynamics well are stage plays or television, and those are rarely the most celebrated arcs or seasons or productions. If one of the best might be Sam and Diane from Cheers, or maybe Lilith and Frasier, I think that's a problem. Although I'd point to my favorite musical, Chess, as having some of the most potent framing of breakups and imploding relationships. If you can get through all of it, it's about the Cold War and chess, go check it out. And they rarely don't get the acclaim that a great breakup album will. And they're certainly less common. And some of this might come down to how we engage with breakup albums in terms of the art, not just the single push to the radio. How often would you put on Hear My Dear or Sea Change or Blood on the Tracks or even this album at a party on the Bigs? These are often intended for intimate listens on the headphones, a more direct experience between artist and audience, to provide dimension or insight or even just catharsis in the artistic conversation for both audience and artist. And they're certainly not easy to tour. More on that later. But again, one thing from both BJ Barham and that Open Mike Eagle understand is that the narrow balance between insight and catharsis is a tricky one. Especially if you're trying to be honest about the experience, admitting all your own flaws, being mature, but also recognizing it's not just you. It can't just be all your fault. And sometimes the overflow of information requires that if you're truthful to not be at your best, which might be why both albums might be considered difficult, if essential listens. The most affecting breakup albums feel like prodding at raw nerves because to share that overflow runs the risk of bad taste, fracturing your own pedestal as an artist and how you've actualized the story around your persona. The story you want to share and tell, but also the one for which you're gonna be the most sensitive, be it autobiographical or stylized. Open Mike Eagle has admitted the critique of anime trauma and divorce touched a much deeper nerve, and I get why. Even beyond the completely rational strain of fall 2020 in America, where he probably should have been given more grace, revisiting it for this piece reveals its strained humanity, where the desire to see beneath the curtain and meet your heroes can sting. How much do you really want to meet the wizard? It's not all guaranteed to be wonderful. And when you have enough self-awareness to know how all of this looks, where it can all feel a little closer to home in the craft, that a critic or audience might not extend the empathy to feel, and then you gotta tour and support it, relive all those painful memories over and over again. To be candid in your emotional complexity, it's cutting down the street, not across the lane. You bleed longer. You bleed deeper. It's harder to heal.
Hey yo, yeah. We're about to get fly on this breakup shit. All of this is not gonna be in the song later. It's probably gonna be something cool right here. Doom, snake bitten, star-crossed, curse, ill-fated, it won't launch. Doom, snake bitten, star-crossed, curse, ill-fated, it won't launch.
So Doomed by extension is more stylized, where the multiverse concept and conceit seems to become both structure and insulation, at least on the surface. Each song becomes its own little thought experiment, how we can make a similar but distinctly different angle on that same collapse, or knowing the collapse is coming. It's building up to a little bit of intellectualization to cushion the blow, allow yourself emotional distance, and even a certain pragmatism and laugh till you cry humor of it all. Even if I were to nitpick, and just like every multiverse story, there are snapshots that feel like they were a little bit more thought through for an atomized idea, and they won't be expanded on further. They're not quite fan service or an Easter egg, but it's more abortive. But there is a major split between this and Dance for the Lonely, and it comes with maturity. Mostly. BJ Barham is actually pretty close to Open Mike Eagle's age. They're both in their 40s now, but Barham was in his mid-20s with that project, even if he might sound older, and thus his moral ambiguity came through a certain self-conscious revel in catharsis, giving himself the freedom to be the asshole that she may have said he was, with an edge then coming in how true that would probably be, and whether you could find empathy for that very flawed man along the way. Paraphrasing a colleague, Dial Drunk by Noah Kahan and then the remix of Post Malone, it's a great song, but if it's among a modern man's favorites, that's a tremendous red flag. And this is just as true, if not more so, for Dance for the Lonely by American Aquarium in specific indie country circles. Repetition in the album structure also serves to highlight the cycles and mindset that a man in the midst of that breakup will fall through, in all of their ugly glory, where in every night at the bar room, commiseration eventually just collapses into misery. And your boy has to step up and tell you that you've stopped being fun to be around. I mean, that's an example for me that comes with true experience. Cherish the friends who will tell you that. One who did for me was a groomsman at my wedding. But a breakup in your mid-20s of a relationship that might have been fleeting and fraught anyway, that's considerably different than one that happens in your mid-40s. And there's very few pieces of art that explore that well, especially of a longer-term relationship where your lives have become intertwined, not just among friends and family and social media, but also living conditions, finance, health insurance, where by necessity the split takes on an intellectual dimension because you need to figure out a place to live and then you need to figure out how to rebuild, where the haunted keys and the dusty horns on the title track highlight this in tragic detail. Shared resources and responsibilities add this new Kafka-esque side to the nightmarish entanglement. You can be superheroes, but when none of you have very much money though, what becomes a moment in a day uncovers this distended sprawl, where the repetition here can symbolize every new layer of paperwork and logistics to be found, as well as manufacture some of that emotional distance and just making it all on paper or on screen. Hell, the tumbling horns across unfinished concrete initials with an excellent verse from Hemlock Ernst shows the active cognitive dissonance and trying to figure out how to live without this person in your life. A hole that you're having to work around rather than putting in the work to fill it. Perhaps this is where rap's poetry can do more than other genres in capturing the level of detail that comes in painting the scene, ground the picture ever deeper, but it also serves to blunt some of the pain, especially in contrast with anime trauma and divorce. Manufacture a little bit more distance. Men tend to be pretty good at intellectualizing the problems and the trauma rather than actually dealing with their feelings, where things have to get dire to get as candid as that 2020 album was, get that emotional. But I'd say it goes further still when you consider how many of these songs focus on the experience of being perceived while the breakup occurs and demanding more distance. The natural level of meta-commentary atop the album echoed in the text. This happens very early on with Streets of Rage, Public Arguments Edition, where this hits the very real discomfort of the implosion happening in public, seemingly at a restaurant, amidst the watery, rattling keys and the heavier beat, the fracture then being broadcast to the world, with Gothic Tropic's excellent verse being the necessary other side to the picture, where the discomfort reminds me a little bit of his 2016 song Insecurity, maybe Insecurity 1 and 2, where you have to at least wonder if a lie would be at least spared them from the tangible embarrassment until they get home. But for Open Mike Eagle, the hook references that arcade side-scroller, relying on button combinations to go through the motions and push back. It's muscle memory. It also pops through everything buried for the sake of the relationship, coming out at the worst time on the muted, sad twinkling of She Swear I'm Colourblind. Another side tangent, there's actually some science that women can see more gradations in color than men, and the refusal of that to be even acknowledged by both parties, even if I think Open Mike Eagle does know it, feels intentionally telling. Then there's Billy Woods with relationship troubles of his own, but long passages of vivid silence where it's not quite coming out yet. For the song to end with shouts in the other room, Open Mike Eagle's willingness to bring other voices into the picture is quintessential. The interlude of It Happens in Every Universe, where two unnamed women bring a very podcast energy to their own intellectualization of what went wrong, is absolutely perfect in selling it. Then you get the ambling pianos and the symbols of perspective in the Irredeemable Magic Man, the guy who strolls into a relationship that might be on the rocks but might be healthy, and then rips it open to saunter away, leaving confusion and distrust in its wake. Who was that man? And why'd he do it? Then there's the nasty little sweetheart jail, where the jail in question is most likely metaphorical and painting a romantic panopticon. How a partner moves when they feel like they can do nothing right, or still having to live while the pain of the breakup is happening, where both sides of the breakup wind up feeling guilty and terrible in the jail they put the other. But depending on the universe, it could just well be societal commentary and considerably more literal. I do wish I actually liked the execution of the song a bit more, though. I would call it one of the weaker fragments. If I have a complaint about the album, is that it can be fragmented in some places. That was kind of an issue with Neighborhood Gods Unlimited, but I think it worked more better thematically. But the other side of being perceived is perceiving. And where Doomed gets truly uncomfortable in the right way comes in these moments. The blinders coming off. Sure, there's the creaking lo-fi woodwinds and drums of Don't Go Look, Battle World Focus Prayer, about the self-harm experience of looking back on an ex on Instagram when she's moved on with someone else. And the most telling thing is how often he focuses on his own flaws, where and what he did wrong, how he looked. I mean, after all, breakups are unmooring. They can force you to confront everything you thought you knew about your reality, what you knew and what you ignored, how good or bad your situation really is, especially when you're no longer sharing it. You gotta live with yourself. And for men who have some degree of maturity, that's gonna force some introspection. And that's the fastest way for those men, often the smartest one, to discard all that maturity for catharsis or dissociation. Character be damned. I should know, I've been there too. There is something acerbic in how the confrontational pianos of science fiction fantasy manifest in a very prickly, very nerdy way, trying to prioritize categorization and logic because that's more grounded, that's what the people want. Gee, I may have referenced that before, only for the relationship collapse to feel so inexplicable, unquantifiable to that version, leaving him lonelier still in the space between words and worlds. And this is where some have encountered a little blurry tension across this project, with Open Mike Eagle then taking stock of his career alongside the breakup, necessary meta-commentary, pondering why he isn't a more notable artist the way he should be, or at least at the level he was in the late 2010s before it all seemed to fall apart. Most notably captured on the awkward honking of Schrodinger's green room, there but uninvited. It's not quite resentment, he's too self-aware to wallow there, but it's certainly been an echo between the lines on really multiple projects in its component system with the auto reverse. This wound that hasn't quite healed. A moment had and then lost, and for what? Especially when there's no clean allocation of fault or accountability. And I'll be honest, that's hard to square. Men have ego, especially those who are veteran working artists, especially those who have the intelligence to back it up and who put a great deal of themselves into their work, and where if it doesn't resonate, they don't eat. It's an enervating feeling to do that sort of introspection and recognize there is some fault to be found, because if you don't do that work, well, you get the many hustles of my lonely time-traveling uncle, where you get the panoply of collectibles that could be sold, traded, or hustled at a time, described with the nasal, drawling detail against the bassy knock. And there are a few terrifying bits of context to note. If the relationship ends in every song, this is for the man who doesn't see the forest for the trees, who bought into those markets before disaster. The polychrome covers of #1 comic issues in the 90s reminds me of the speculator bubble, when Marvel and DC would just print out new #1s, restart the line, reset the numbering with gaudy covers to drive collector interest, only for the market to become oversaturated and collapse amidst all the ploys for false scarcity. I collected baseball cards in that era, and I collect vinyl now. I know the game. With the housing crisis is also in frame in that song, another tactile and thematic relationship entanglement. There was a time with a breakup where you'd have to worry about lodging, but it was just a little easier to find space to give you the house. But it would also be the man who retreats into his hobbies, hustles post-breakups, tattoos, gold chains, anime, a nostalgia about how he used to make a lot of money to afford all these things. So go live in that past, because what's it worth now? All the more artifice to deflect from the pain at the core. That seems to be a recurring motif.
Somebody broke the mold, somebody freed the slave. Everybody lost control and suddenly felt the need to pray, but can't find one hand to hold.
There's one final angle to Doomed, of which I have already overthought and referenced, but deserves the proper note. The fact that this ending occurring in every universe, a fate that as the album proceeds, the protagonist seems to know more and more, a glitch in causality. Or maybe not. Maybe it's not the fissure that is the defining synchronicity across the universes, but the knowledge the fissure is coming, that it's inevitable. That to further annoy a dead noble laureate, there is poetry in the entropy of a relationship going from its most concentrated state, which is low entropy, let's get the science right, to the most diffuse, most high entropy, an irreversibility anchored to time's progression and thermodynamics. There's no going back. The song Infinity War Spoiler seems to imply that Open Mike Eagle within the album construct knows that it's true for every version of himself, where by the scientific nature of the probabilities he could not be fully certain of the place or time, but how much does that certainty matter when the creeping malaise seems to make it feel all the more inevitable, if that is where it must go. Because just as the hard work of introspection can be enervating, especially if you're too smart and you overthink all of it, what might be worse is knowing what's coming and that it's inevitable. Reminds me of an old Dragonlance novel from the 1980s, and a story within a story, where the cruelest curse the gods ever place upon a powerful mortal wizard is the ability to see and know the future, and know that nothing can be done to change it. The wizard initially laughs. He thinks it's no curse, but a gift, only to die a death most horrible. And yet, that's a story. There can still be some freedom here, even a note of comfort that the horrible things were meant to happen in their way. I remember a university debating tournament finals in the early 2010s I was in. I was on the side of arguing fate over free will, and I literally opened my speech quoting Gandalf from Fellowship of the Ring, talking to Frodo in Moria. How fate can be an encouraging thought. Funny, my debate partner in that tournament wound up my best man in my wedding last year. Is that just fate? Or things working out? My choices. And the final song of this album has some of those thoughts too. He can do what he wants as a single man. He can manage all of it. He's done it before. There's a resignation in knowing that's where it inevitably had to go. He can see through it all to the end, and we can all just leave. She could leave, or we could leave as the audience. But I wonder now if Gandalf was just saying everything in the minds to get Frodo over that line. That by the end of the journey, be it from the books and the Scouring of the Shire or the idyllic home he returns to in the films, Frodo realizes he can never fully go home again. He's changed fundamentally. There's an irreversibility. It'll never quite be the same. Because there are wounds that don't heal easily, if they ever fully heal. I think back to the end of Brick Body Kids Still Daydream and my auntie's building and how abrupt that demolition was. How Brick Body Kids ended so sharply to intensify the rapacious pointlessness of the destruction of homes, where there might be a more direct cause to its trauma, but how much would any justification matter when the whole remains in the foundation? You can't help but feel similarly unmoored at the end of Doomed, where on an album closer, watching a movie called Freedom by myself, I couldn't identify which recent movie named Freedom he was talking about. Pretty common movie title. Maybe in multiple universes he watched different movies with that same title, and for as many justifications as you hear, the hollowness remains. My auntie's building used brevity to show the wound still gaping, the shock, the trauma of the moment, whereas this song uses space to linger, to breathe, to muse, to ponder. He still gave of himself to try to make it work, and by watching, by listening, we did too. We heard the sound of breaking his body down, of all of our voices in his skull. Is he still paying the cost of pretending he is strong? For our sakes? Is there peace made in understanding the end that you see coming?